See Live. Be here to talk about start sit decisions, the injury report, the active and active list once it comes out, and of course, answer any and all of your fantasy football questions. Sit tight. All right, so welcome in. Here we are in week three, recording this on Sunday, September 24th. And yes, just about an hour and a half before the week three kickoff, or at least the week three Sunday games will kick off. Obviously, we've had the Giants 49ers game already in week three. So that might have a lot of fantasy relevance, fantasy relevant players are had played. And maybe even like some random Apparitas or Darius Slayton's. Like I've certainly got some random players already have started in lineups, but yeah, it means there could still be, however, some interesting start sit decisions to be made for Sunday's games and potentially even the later games. So I'll talk about what I'm doing with my own teams, and what I'll also do is, especially for like the later play games, there's some questionable players for the 4 o'clock Eastern starts or even Sunday or Monday night. So we'll take a look at that. I'll talk about like plans I've made on certain teams, what I've decided to do in some instances, and yeah, we'll go from there. And of course, again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them over. I will do my best to answer all of them. I'll also check Twitter at Senra says to try and keep up to date in case someone tags me in something and has a question that way. I'll try to get to every question, answer all of them. I guess before then, just a quick shout out to MyBookie. If you use the promo code Press22 on your initial deposit match, so the first time you sign up for MyBookie and use that deposit code, you'll get they'll double whatever you deposit in that initial first run. So up to $1,000. So if let's say you max out and put in the $1,000 with that promo code Press22, they'll give you another 1,000 in your account. You'll have 2,000 to make bets on NFL games, player prop contests, anything they have at my bookie. So appreciate that. But fantasy football talk, fantasy uh, live talk here, week three. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to share the spreadsheet that I keep track of my start sit decisions with. So let me just share that, and I'll show you how I'm evaluated and hope that this not only helps specific decisions, but also the like general philosophies of what we're looking for in lineup decisions. So as you can see here, I'll have a few leagues. I got 5 different leagues where I've got decisions to make. So we'll start with some of the simpler ones. And yes, so actually, this I can update because in this particular league, the Pros with Joe's league, shout out to first off, shout out to Eric Romoff at Fantasy Nav on Twitter for organizing this. It's a great way to give donations to tons of different charities. I ended up paired with Mags, from Dynasty Hot Seat and uh, Fantasy Rewind, or Fantasy Wildcard Rewind. Uh, Fantasy Wildcard is Yeah, so Mags and I co-managed together, and we did go put a claim in for Kareem Hunt. And now, if Kareem Hunt wasn't playing, or we didn't get Kareem Hunt, then we would have been forced to play 2 of these 3 guys. But between Jake Ferguson, Adam Thielen, and Nick Westbrook-Akine, who ends up in those final flex spots? The other thing too is I've kept CEH here because if we get news that Isaiah Pacheco's out, because he is questionable, well, I know for myself, I think I've only got Pacheco in 1 league, but the consequences for me are I've got CEH in a lot of places, so I might end up starting him in a few spots if Pacheco's gone. This will be one of them. So I guess for now, keeping well, actually, yeah, because the problem is we ended up getting Kareem Hunt. So now it really would come down to CEH or Thielen. But essentially, if we didn't get Kareem Hunt and if Pacheco played, we would have been forced to start 2 of these guys: Jake Ferguson, Adam Thielen. We went with Adam Thielen, and the reason for that is some of the different factors. Right now, I've got 5. Once starting 2 weeks from now, starting week 5, I will start publishing my goal line guide article series on fullpresscoverage.com. And so I'm going to incorporate those goal line guides into these decisions as well. But for now, looking at the odds makers, what they said, implied total for each team, but also the over under for the game as a whole. Also, average. So this average is a fantasy point average. 2 games, what have these players produced on average, averaging out their 2 weeks of performance, just to give me a single number to compare the projections for each player, and also fantasy points allowed for defense and what they rank in that. And green means go, orange slow down. So, like for the defensive rank, the smaller number means uh, they like they are the best defenses. They rank as the second best defense. So they allow the second fewest fantasy points to uh, opposing receivers. Or, yeah, well, in this case, it'd be receivers, but whatever position it is. So Adam Thielen's matchup is great because the Seahawks, the 29th fewest, which means they've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So it's an edge there. Really, Thielen, his own production, his fantasy points projection matchup is the best. Really, the only thing that isn't the best for him is the implied total in the over. Even the over under is pretty good. So the implied total, the Cowboys, and this was I got these shoes because I wanted the initial opening, not the once everyone's bet and they've the odds makers have had to adjust. Like what did they project to start the and they projected 28 total points scored for the Cowboys, the second highest. The Chiefs are the only team higher. So that gave an edge there. But as high as they are, their over under for that game is still only 42.5 because playing the Cardinals, not a great matchup. But the thing is, it's not a great matchup in the sense that it's not a great game script for pass catchers. You expect the Cowboys to lead early and often, and then suddenly they'll be not passing very much at all in the second half. The Cardinals have traditionally been really weak against tight ends for years now. It's to me, it's and I looked, they're not the worst, and they haven't allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends yet. They're 2 weeks. They've allowed the 24th fewest, so that's the ninth most fantasy points to tight ends. Still seems like it's a better matchup right now. Seahawks against receivers than it is Cardinals against tight ends. Like we're only 2 weeks in, so that there's room for those numbers to fluctuate. But I'll just say I had to go with Adam Thielen for it. Now, some other decisions aren't as obvious. Let's say. For instance, and I think we saw. I thought I saw news on Twitter just before I got started that Aaron Jones would be out, and this was kind of done in the instance of if Jones is out, who do I have to replace him with as a running back? So I had 4 options. This is in Scott Fishbowl. I've actually been pretty well in Scott Fishbowl. Having Patrick Mahomes helped, but yeah, 4-0 so far. So I've won both my matchups and had over the average median score. Yeah, 4-0 weeks, pretty good in Scott Fishbowl. One of these guys will help me here. So Michael Carter, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Latavius Murray, Samaje Perine. Who is the Aaron Jones replacement? And again, looking through some of these things, yeah, one of the things that became obvious was I probably shouldn't have considered Michael Carter. They had the lowest implied total. That game total is the lowest combined over under. His fantasy points have been the lowest of these 4. His projection is the lowest of these 4. The matchup's actually not awful. But the only bad matchup of these 4 really is Latavius Murray. The Commanders have allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to running back through 2 weeks again. But it's still Clyde and Samaje have better matchups. And Latavius, I like him, but as a guy in probably the 3rd running back in a 3-way committee, I like having to decide between Clyde and Samaje. The I would love if if the Broncos either played later at 4 o'clock or the Chiefs played earlier, because that way I would get to know, is Pacheco out? And then deciding between Clyde and Samaje. I was talking to Braden Holochek, our full press coverage Chiefs managing editor, and for anyone watching on the YouTube network, you would have saw him earlier this morning with me in London on the little Sunday pregame show. Um, he seems to think Pacheco will, and which echoed my thoughts. I thought if Pacheco was questionable coming into week 1, he ultimately ended up playing, led the team in catches. So, I think even if he's questionable, and this is, I think, different. I think this is a lower body, tissue injury as opposed to he was recovering from shoulder injury surgery, and that's why he was questionable week 1. So it's not the shoulder, but it does look like it's something else, which could be concerning for Pacheco. But at the same time, the tendency has been, okay, we'll keep him questionable, but he will play, and he will still be the lead back. It might be a committee. No Pacheco, I love Clyde over Samaje, but with Pacheco in the lineup, it kinda Clyde's basically splitting time with McKinnon as the 2 who's the 2, who's the 3 in that might come down to game script against the Bears. It might favor a early down guy like Clyde as opposed to the pass catcher in McKinnon. Still, he's fighting for that 2nd spot. We know it's Javonte and Samaje. Like those are the 2 Broncos guys, and yes, Jaleel McLaughlin did get the touchdown last week, but he hasn't gotten enough carries to stand in the way of Samaje's production. He's vulturing touchdowns. So I am leaning Samaje. He has scored well in spite of the split they've had at Denver, averaged 12.23 fantasy points per game over 2 weeks. His projection's the best out of between him and Clyde. Really is just the matchups are both really good. We've got the 4th fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs are the Dolphins, 6th fewest for the Bears. So both matchups look really good. Uh, really the thing with the Chiefs is they have the highest implied total, like I mentioned earlier. The game total is one of the higher ones in the week on the league on the week as well. 48.5. I believe that might be the 2nd highest over under. So Chiefs do carry that a lot on their own, but still high scoring game expected. Now the Dolphins Broncos are as well. Less the Broncos are underdogs, so their implied total isn't as high, but the 47.5 line total does mean a good game script. However, it's not the game script you want for running back like Piran. You want him to be favored. Uh, and yeah, high scoring game or potentially low scoring game, but at least be favored. But the underdogs, that's where we don't love running backs as much. So the game script matchup portion of it, it kind of leans to Clyde, but on individual merit based on fantasy points, it should be Samaje. So that's probably where I'm going is putting Samaje in the lineup and Clyde out. Now that I think again, and I'll go through all the teams shortly. We're about 15 minutes away from you usually when I do that. It looks like Aaron Jones is out, so it looks like I'm going to be having to start Samaje. I will say honestly, my most difficult decision is probably this one, this Yahoo League. I have to start 3 of these 5 receivers. Courtland Sutton, Amari Cooper, Jaden Reed, Rashid Shaheed, and Jahan Dotson. The 2 decisions I've made at kind of the extreme end are to play Dotson and to play Amari Cooper. Part of that is weather. I looked at the forecast, doesn't seem it's too bad, but there is still concern with this tropical storm on the East Coast. It could affect, say, the Commanders and especially affect the pass catchers teams. But really, the Commanders have the lowest implied total of these 5 teams. Broncos, Browns, and then the 2 teams in the Saints Packers list. Um, and also Dotson has not produced as well as these others, and actually by a margin. Like all 4 of the other receivers are averaging double-digit fantasy points in the first 2 weeks. So it's a significant margin below those guys, and I think just with the weather, it's enough for me to worry, and I'll leave Dotson on the bench for sure in that league. And then it's on the other extreme, Amari Cooper looks really good. Projections the highest. Yeah, he hasn't necessarily scored as much as Rashid Shaheed has. His matchup is great though. The Titans seem like they're a pass funnel defense. Like they are so good against the run, but they're just passing so much on them, specifically at wide receivers. They've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers in 2 weeks. So, I'll just say I really like this matchup for Cooper. So he felt like the obvious guy to start. He was questionable last week, and he ended up playing and doing well. So, no designation this week. It looks like he's good to go. I'm gonna plug him in lineups as if he's good. Knowing that Watson and AJ Dillon are out, I really like Jaden Reed as the 2nd guy to play of of the 3 that I will select, and partially because just of more targets for him if presumably the top 2 targets on the team, and we haven't seen Watson yet this year, so we really don't know, but I would presume once he's back in the lineup, he will lead the team in targets. So not having him means more targets for Reed. Not having Aaron Jones also means more targets over the middle for a slot receiver, which is where Reed has primarily played. I expect, and maybe we do see Jaden Reed to the outside a little bit. Just Dontavian Wicks would come into the slot at times, but I do wonder if Marshawn Lattimore will end up being matched up against Romeo Dubs more often than not. Pulls that away. If Reed ends up against Lattimore, it might be tough for him, but you get him in the slot and away from Marshawn Lattimore, then I think that's really advantageous for Jaden Reed. So, I think that's where I'm gonna go, and then it really does come down to Courtland Sutton versus Rashid Shaheed. Guess the implied totals are pretty close. 0.75 for the Broncos, 20.25 for the Saints. Again, as a Packers fan, here I'm decked out in, I was shocked. Even if they're at home, I was surprised to see the Packers favored to open the week. But still, the implied total in that game is only 42.5 as opposed to 47.5 for the Dolphins. And I mentioned maybe not the game script you want for P. Ryan, but it's certainly the game script you'd want for Sutton. He's trailing, and it's expected to be a higher scoring game, so more pass attempts. That would kind of factor into lead towards Sutton. However, Shaheed's been producing, and out of all these guys, he's produced the most points so far through 2 weeks. It's not by much. Pretty sure he also has the most targets as well. So, and their projections are super similar. 7.94 for Sutton. Shaheed is at 8.09. Actually, Jaden Reed has the lowest projection. I also wonder if that changes because of the fact that, um, because of just, these projections were done with the anticipation that Watson or Jones would play, if not both, and yet neither. And so I could see that projection needing to be higher as a result of that. Matchups are tough for both. The Dolphins have allowed the fourth fewest fantasy points to receivers, considering how much they score, and I think that's pretty surprising, to be honest. But also, the Packers have only allowed the fifth most fantasy points to receivers. Drake London did have a touchdown last week, but they've also kept the yards down, and they've been getting torched by running backs, though, which maybe welcome to the NFL. Kendre Miller, he torches the Packers defense too, which doesn't leave as much for the receivers. There are good corners out there to cover. It's just um, tough matchups for both. I kinda like how Shaheed has been scoring on his own even as the 3rd wide receiver. It's another week without Kamara. I think that's probably how I'm gonna lean, to be honest. Just concerns about the Broncos. They're orange, right? So maybe instead of Portland Sun in orange. But yeah, those are, I would say, my 3 biggest decisions. One quick one was honestly Zach Moss versus Dameon Pierce. If I look at literally every factor, Zach Moss is better than Dameon Pierce. I thought that was kind of interesting. The implied total is higher for the Colts instead of the Texans. Now it's 1 point, and they're both below 18.5, so it's pretty bad for both. The over-unders are super similar, but again, a 1 point difference in favor of Moss. Really, what they've produced so far, and Moss has only played 1 game, so in a very rush kind of stat line, certainly a rush heavy stat line, 21-12. I think fans of Rush and we'll get that joke, but yeah, in game he smashed. He got all the opportunities, and again, it's another week without Jonathan Taylor. I think Trey Sermon's been activated for the Colts and looks like he's going to be the main backup. So see Zach Moss still continuing to do well. It's a tougher matchup. It's a tougher match against the Ravens, but it's a tougher match against the Jags. Their projections are super close. Does still again a lot of these, like 3 of these factors, the game total, the over under, and their individual projections slightly favor Moss, but still favoring Moss, even the matchup. 3rd fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs are the Jags. Ravens are at 5th. So, tough matchups for both. Really, though, it's just we saw Moss produce last week, and Pierce has really struggled to produce. So, it's funny, and I remember talking about this week 1. I actually benched Pierce in this league for David Montgomery. Someone was thought, "Well, that's bold," but it turned out to be the right call. Like, not a lot of people would have made that decision, how high everyone was on Pierce coming into the season. But so far, Brian Robinson and David Montgomery were kinda carrying the team through and, leaving Pierce kind of relegated to the bench, and honestly, Zach Moss might come and do that same thing. So, there's a few leagues where, you know, the projected volume of Pierce, how good he did last year, don't just jam him in every lineup just because. I think I'm still gonna play him in 2 spots. But instances where I'm only gonna play 2 running backs and flex other positions, or in this league, there are no flex spots, so we only can play 2 running backs. I'm gonna go with Moss because I've got the options. Anyway, that's those are my start sit decisions. And just in time. Joel coming to join as well. Love Joel. Super supportive of us in full press coverage and always asking great questions. I know last week I apparently helped him because I suggested Lamar Jackson over Justin Fields, I believe it was, and that turned out to really be the right decision. And he ended up winning as a result of that. Joel was nice enough to send a message on Twitter and for everyone to see. It wasn't just a DM. He tweeted that out, tagged me in it. So I appreciate Joel for that. Hey Kyle, which one should I start? DK Metcalf or Mike Williams? Okay, so here this is perfect, Joel, because this is about to lead to my next topic of questionable players for late. And DK is one of those guys where I've kind of got my eye on it of, oh, I gotta be aware of this because DK Metcalf is questionable. He's playing at 4:25 kickoff for 4:25 Eastern for the Seahawks game. I'm pretty certain the Chargers are playing at 1 o'clock. So that means to me, Joel, I'm easily going Mike Williams because of the risk of if you don't play him, who I guess you could maybe answer this and expand on this. If you choose to go with Metcalf and he is ruled out, who do you have to plug into your lineup that can replace Metcalf in that instance? I'd imagine not someone as good as Mike Williams, otherwise you'd probably be deciding between them. So my quick thought is to just play it safe and go with Mike Williams. Honestly, it looks like it's a great matchup. That Vikings Chargers game is the highest over under of any game in the week. I mentioned earlier the Chiefs and Bears are at 48.5, and I think that's the second highest compared to a 54.5 Chargers Vikings over under. And yeah, they are playing at 1 o'clock. So I think I would want to take advantage of that matchup and play Mike Williams. And that way you're bench Metcalf and you take out the risk. If Metcalf plays, and so be it. But if he's out, you don't have to be scrambling at 4 o'clock. Yeah, you said Mike Williams it is. So I'm guessing there's either and I've done this in a couple leagues, like who's available on the waivers. I don't have someone on my bench that can replace Metcalf with. Who's available on the waivers that I can go pick up? But yeah, so I would imagine Williams is still a smart play. I think he's a great play this week. I've got him. If anyone's listened to the full press fantasy pod, I've rostered him a ton this year. One of my most rostered dynasty wide receivers, and then draft I've still been taking him. I believe he was the at the time when the season started, he was my third most rostered player, or I think yeah, tied with Clyde as my third most rostered player overall across dynasty and redraft. Jamal Williams and Christian Kirk were the only ones higher, and basically I've just been playing Williams in every lineup I have. So I'm just getting all these points. The way I see it with Williams, he's such a boom bust guy. He's so tough to decide when to play him because he can be susceptible to A, getting hurt, but B, just not being the primary target getter because of Keenan Allen. And so, but there are weeks where he just smashes, catches a couple long touchdowns, and he almost wins you the week on his own. And I think Mike Williams is the kind of guy like that where you just, and the way I've been approaching him is, I've got so much of him, I'm just playing him everywhere. Play him everywhere, capture as many of the boom weeks as possible. Yeah, that means I might get hit by the dud weeks, but for receivers like Mike Williams, I want to capture as many of those spike weeks as possible. And the only way you really do that is just play him every week. Now, DK Metcalf's a really good option, so I could, in theory, understand the idea of wanting to bench Williams for Metcalf. With all the risk of Metcalf's injury, I think it's and combined with the over under of that Chargers Viking games, I think it's way too enticing. I'm all in on Mike Williams. Yeah, definitely go with that, Joel. I think. Hope I'm right there. But yeah, some of the things I'm doing for Metcalf, if you want to play him, because he's the type of high upside player that if he's active, you want to play him, unless you've really got better options like Mike Williams. Uh, so for myself, actually, one of the leagues where I have Metcalf is that one I was showing earlier with Courtland Sutton and Rashid Shaheed, and part of it is like I've still got Metcalf in right now, so I could, in theory, just put Sutton in over Metcalf, but Metcalf high enough upside that like Courtland Sutton to me, I view Mike Williams as better. I like the offense better. The quarterback he's tied to better. So that's the type of high upside guy I'm going to play for Metcalf. But Courtland Sutton, not as much. So I'm willing to hold out Metcalf. And what I did was I went and I picked up Tutu Atwell. And this is the thing. It's sometimes this might be just a good general thing to do if you've got a bench spot. Every week at the start of the week, try and pick up someone who's playing in the Monday night, not with the intention of playing him, but with the intention that if any of your other players are questionable through the week and are ruled out, you've got this Monday night player that you know you can throw in. They'll be available for you to throw in your lineup to replace anybody. So that might just be a thing that in deeper bench leagues, you just do that every week. You make sure there's a Monday night player on your bench that you're willing to start. And, you want to get the best possible guys, right? And so like a guy like Tutu Atwell, for instance, with Cooper Kupp's still out, expect him to get targets. Believe he's been in targets, uh, behind only Puka Nacua. But yeah, so I'm willing to bench Courtland Sutton in favor of a guy like Tutu Atwell if it means it gives me the chance to play Metcalf. Oh, Metcalf's out, I just insert Tutu in, knowing he's playing Monday night, I've got all this time. Whereas with Courtland Sutton, he's playing at 1 o'clock, so I can't wait for DK Metcalf and wait for that news to find out if he's active to decide whether to play Sutton or not, but I have that luxury with Tutu Atwell, so those Monday night players really help. Honestly, in another league, and this is the advantage also of flexing guys, like, if a guy like Metcalf, I would want to flex him so that I don't have to replace him with a wide receiver if I don't have one. I've got CEH kinda lined up as a potential replacement for Metcalf, in one of these leagues, so if Metcalf's out, I can just go in and running back, and part of that is because I'm playing in the flex. Speaking of which, I mentioned Isaiah Pacheco earlier. He's another one of those guys, a 425 star, but he's questionable. I like the upside if he plays. It's a great matchup against the Bears, but if he doesn't go, I wanna take a 0. So, I actually have Darnell Mooney on my bench. It's funny, it's the same game. So if Pacheco's out, I've got that 4 o'clock player playing, and I can put him in. But what was key to that is we have to start 3 running backs. So I had to find 3 running backs, put them in the lineup, and then flex Pacheco. It's Derrick Henry, one of them's Tyler Algier. I remember who the 3rd guy is. Yep, I don't have it. That's okay. I love that team, I should remember. But yeah, but all to say, you wanna flex those players as best as possible. The one last example is Devonta Smith, and this is maybe not as relevant because he's no longer questionable, but he did have a questionable designation through the week. So the leagues where I had him in, I either made sure to already have a Monday player or establish something, but it's also to set your lineup up, and that might impact decisions. My friend Akili and I were talking, a co-managed league where we had Devonta Smith, and the thought was, he likes Chris Godwin a lot, and so do I. We drafted him for a reason. But I actually had Chris Godwin on the bench. And that way, if regardless of what we did, whether it was Flex Smith or even playing as a receiver, we had that wide receiver option to just replace Smith with. And part of it was Aaron Jones. We have him. Knowing Aaron Jones is out, you probably have to flex that wide receiver. So it made sense to just keep Godwin on the bench, and that way he comes in as the replacement um, for Devontae Smith in case he's out. But now again, it looks like he's going to play. Still kind of like having that backup just in case. You never know. Even if he's no longer questionable, something could still happen today or tomorrow that makes him miss the game. So yeah, but I think for now, so a guy like Smith might impact decisions. Deciding between Chris Godwin and Jaden Reed, you might favor Godwin, but in this instance, I would say go with Reed, and that way you have Godwin as that backup for Monday night to replace Smith with. So that might be something where the questionable player on a Monday impacts other decisions in your lineup because you set yourself up. I mean, you could just go out and pick up Olamide Zaccheaus, but I think to replace Smith in the lineup, I'd rather do it with Chris Godwin. And if there's other options that I think are comparable to Godwin that I could already put in my lineup to keep Godwin on the bench, I say that's worth doing. So playing Jaden Reed, playing Zay Flowers, benching Chris Godwin, and that way if something happens to Devontae Smith, you can plug Chris Godwin in the lineup. You don't feel like you're missing out because he's a good enough player. Like if you had to go pick up Quez Watkins or Zaccheaus, you feel like your upside is diminishing from Smith to those guys. And I do think Smith's better than Godwin, but it's not that big of a drop. Could have weeks where Godwin outperforms Smith, and it's not a surprise at all. So yeah, so those are some of my decisions I'm going to make. The next thing I'm going to do is actually go through the active and inactive list, and I'll just share all the players that are inactive. So let me look that up, and we'll share that with you. All right, it's just loading. All right. So looking at the Falcons to start, because we'll go alphabetical, of course. This is interesting. Cordell Patterson will be inactive for the 3rd straight game this week. I think part of it is injury, but it is interesting that, man, it's all going to be everything in the backfield is just Bijan and Algier. Obviously, Bijan's a must start every week, but I think Algier is a decent matchup against the Lions to also play here. Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens are um, They are without Odell Beckham and without Justice Hill at running back. They're also without left tackle, Ronnie Stanley. The second straight week he misses, and starting center Tyler Linderbaum. So, a couple of injuries at O-line. Still wanna play Gus Edwards, though. I think Melvin Gordon might be worth picking up as the main backup right now, but I wouldn't wanna play Melvin Gordon. But yeah, I think Gus Edwards is gonna get a lot of carries, so he's worth playing. I suppose with Beckham out, it seemed like Rashad Bateman gets more targets, but, he still looks like the number 3 target behind Mark Andrews and behind Zay Flowers. So, those 2 are must starts. I don't think Bateman's a must start, but he certainly could be in consideration. For the Bills, nothing really of fantasy relevance. So a couple of the defensive backs from last week, Clear, Elam, Damar Hamlin. Ultimately, though, with the weather, I'm not gonna push up the Washington pass catchers as a result of that, which would affect there. Um, with the Browns, same thing. It's the biggest injury they probably have is cornerback Greg Newsome. It's the Titans. They really exploit through the passing game. It's been hasn't been great to say the least. For the Broncos, again, the biggest injury might be a defensive back, safety Justin Simmons. That's probably their biggest one. Um, Tyreek Hill, we know Jalen Waddle's out, so I guess, there might be some leagues where Durham Smythe actually becomes, a viable play as well, just maybe more targets for him, starting in a spot or 2. Detroit Lions, so David Montgomery's out. So here's the thing, this is something I've wanted to kinda maybe rant about. Everyone's talking about Craig Reynolds, and I'm hearing, Craig Reynolds get the talk of, "Oh, he's gonna be the guy that gets the early down work, um, to replace, Montgomery," and Jahmyr Gibbs is still gonna maintain his role he has. Um, and I think that's kinda not the case. Um, here's the thing with Craig, um, he has 82 career carries. He's played for 5 seasons now. And a lot of it has come with Detroit. Last year, he carried the ball 3 times, and we only played 2 games, but, even, like, the year before, 2022, Dan Campbell's first season, he had 23 carries and 9. He has I guess he does have more career carries than catches. And he's not really much of a pass catcher either, but my whole point is we have never seen him just absorb a bunch of carries ever in, like, any single game. Like, well, look what his single game high is, but we're talking 55 over the course of an entire season, so as his career high, so I don't know that he's got, like, a big any single game. Oh, wow. Yeah. So, basically, half of his carries that one season where he had 55, 26 of them came in one game, the Cardinals, and he's never even gotten 12 carries in a game other than so there's just one game that exists that's kind of this outlier for Craig Reynolds. I almost viewed him as the, like, he's and people would say, "Oh, he's been active over Zonovan Knight." He's also been on the team a lot longer. I think his role is a big part of it special teams. Um, but Zonovan Knight, yeah, last year as a rookie, he had more carries than Craig Reynolds his entire career. Yeah, just over 85 to 82. But we've also seen, a stretch of multiple games where Zonovan Knight absorbed big amounts of carries. He went, last year with the Jets, 14 carries, 15 carries, 17 carries, 13 carries, and then 14 over the next dozen carries the week after. So he's already had 5 games in his career of 12 or more carries. Craig Reynolds has 1. Zonovan Knight's entering his 2nd year where Craig Reynolds is in his 5th season. So ultimately, I think Zonovan Knight's the guy. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is still the guy, but I think Zonovan Knight is the player you want to have. Craig Reynolds is like a satellite special teamer. I could see Zonovan Knight getting the big boost in carries with David Montgomery's out. I wouldn't start him, but I've picked him up in a couple spots and now hoping that he gets the carries and maybe you can flip him or consider starting him next week. Falcons defense, they held the Packers in check last week, but AJ Dillon just sucks. So I'm so fed up and done with AJ Dillon. I ranted this on the Full Press Packers pod earlier this week, but there was a play where they opened things up. He would have got the first down pretty easily, and instead he trips over Elton Jenkins. So like the poor vision, the poor like spacing he has, he falls over just short of that line. I think they had to go for it on 4th down, and they got it anyway, but he injured Elton Jenkins, now he has an MCL sprain, and he's not playing. So, yeah, AJ Dillon, thanks for hurting the best offensive lineman who's active because Bakhtiari looks like he's out as well. But speaking of the inactives, let's get to going on that. This is my Zonovan Knight, Craig Reynolds rant. Uh-oh. So, yeah, this is, as a Packers fan, this is more of an uh-oh than for fantasy, a couple of fantasy relevant players. But I would argue the Packers are gonna be without 5 of the best players on both sides of the ball. Um, Aaron Jones, Christian Watson, they're both gonna miss again, so AJ Dillon gets the start at running back. Probably means the 3 starting receivers for the Packers are Romeo Doubs, Dontayvion Wicks, and Jaden Reed. Reed and Wicks will probably split time in the slot. Um, Both starting left guys on the offensive line. Starting left tackle David Bakhtiari is out. Starting left guard Elton Jenkins is out. And now news that starting cornerback, honestly, maybe the team's best player overall, Jaire Alexander is out. So, and they're already without, uh, boy, really fast guy. Corner they took a couple years ago. I can't even think of him. Wow, brain not working this morning. But anyway, yeah, so they're already thin at corner, as is. So yeah, Carrington Valentine's probably going to have to play. And if Chris Olave is getting covered by, covered by Carrington Valentine, this is I'm pretty worried as a Packers fan for this game. Anyway, let's move on. Houston Texans. Case Keenum, Dario Wally, quarterback and running back are both inactive. So it's funny. It's been 2 in a row where the first week Mike Boone was active, Wally was inactive. And then last week, Wally came in as the third running back, Mike Boone was inactive. Now it's flipped back again. So maybe just a rotation they do all year. Singletary's going to be active all weeks as the main backup, but not do anything because Pierce is the starter, isn't even doing anything. So Laramie Tunsil at left tackle is also starting. Talked about that last week. For the Colts, Anthony Richardson at quarterback is out with concussion, which means Gardner Minshew is starting. Um, yeah, a couple of, I mean, their starting center Ryan Kelly's out as well, so it hurts the overall upside of that offense. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, Zay Jones is inactive. Also, Parker Washington's out. So, who is the third? I guess Jamal Agnew comes in third receiver. So in 11 personnel, he'll be on the field more. I do think what it means is Christian Kirk might play more on the outside, and in 2 tight end sets and 2 wide receiver sets, I think he's gonna be on the field more. That was the thing. Kirk was mostly just playing as the slot receiver, and they play a lot as 11 personnel, but when they didn't, he would come off the field. With Zay Jones out of the lineup, I could see Kirk just replacing him in the 2 wide receiver sets. So, week for Christian Kirk, just start him everywhere. My most rostered receiver, and, you know, after week 1, but last week was able to get him in most of the lineups. I think 6 of the 9. So I think this week I'm probably going to go 8 of 9 with Christian Kirk. So just get him in everywhere you can, and hope he has a good game. LA Chargers, Austin Eckler's out, so Josh Kelly gets to start at running back. I believe Isaiah Spiller would be the main backup as well. Looking at the Miami Dolphins, so Salvin Ahmed is inactive at running back. We've also already talked earlier. Jalen Waddle out with a concussion. I guess River Craycraft is the main wide receiver, too, for the Dolphins, and then I could see Durham Smythe just getting the targets. You wonder if they start to use the running back Achane as a pass catcher, but it looks like he's gonna be the main backup this week behind Raheem Mostert. I think Mostert's in a great spot this week. I would definitely play him. Yeah, actually, I'm gonna look that up. Who would be the Dolphins? I think River Craycraft would be starting in the lineup. Who would be also on the field in 11 personnel? Look that up real quick. Who is the who else the Dolphins would have? So, Braxton Berrios, that's right. So, it probably what it'll be is Tyreek Hill and actually, Berrios is listed as the slot receiver. So, I'd imagine Tyreek and Tyreek Hill and River Craycraft are gonna be the 2 outside receivers for the Dolphins. Berrios is gonna probably play a lot in the slot. Cedric Wilson would be the main backup to any of those 3. So, yeah, it looks like the running backs will be Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, and then, Chris Brooks will be the 3rd guy. Seems like Brooks has actually been getting more carries than Achane. I do wonder if that's gonna flip at some point, maybe. Anyway, so Minnesota Vikings, they just traded for Cam Akers. I don't think it's gonna have too much of an effect on Madison. Akers has been pretty brutal, to be honest, and I'm a big Cam Akers fan, so I'm not gonna say that, just accept that. I just this morning, I traded him for a 4th rounder in a league. It's a salary cap league, and I picked up the 5th-year option. Obviously, it was a huge mistake to do that, so next year, I'll be backing it. that now I don't have to worry about. So yeah, the guy I took in the first round of that league to get Taekwon Thornton in the fourth for him is yeah, that's how far he's fallen. He's going to be inactive. Looks like it's a healthy scratch, which isn't maybe too surprising. Just traded for him. They want to get him acclimated to the offense. But it also says they're not trading for him. Okay, we have to get him in the lineup because he's that much better than Madison. Like, I think Alexander Madison is still going to be the lead running back for this team. I expect he's had two really tough matchups and hasn't. Did have the one touchdown on against the Bucks. That was a pass catching touchdown. I could see him smashing in this matchup against the Chargers. And he's even used as a pass catcher as well. So yeah, but even past these good matchups, I still think Madison is the main guy, and Akers, it's really could probably beat out Ty Chandler for the main back. But maybe later in the year, they can get him to a point where he's competing with Madison for the starting job. But I think it's going to be Madison's job for a while. Uh, New England Patriots, Keyshawn Butte is out. Also, the guard City Sal, who's a Canadian, they just drafted him. He's out. I don't think he's one of the starters, so that really Butte, both rookies, right? So that really shouldn't affect their offense too much. New Orleans Saints, Foster Moreau's inactive at tight end, and then Perry's inactive at wide receiver. I've got Juwan Johnson in a couple spots. I'll start him and play him in the lineup. Moreau being out doesn't really change that though, because he was still always the starting tight end anyway. How could I confuse a tight end with a running back on the Saints? Oh wait, Taysom Hill exists. Anyway, yeah, okay, I'll save the Taysom Hill rants for now. Um, Not to panic people, but Bryce Hall is inactive for the Jets. That is cornerback Bryce Hall, not running back Breece Hall. Because again, the Jets would never want us to confuse us between a cornerback and a running back. They wouldn't go in the same draft and draft cornerback Michael Carter in the same draft as drafting running back Michael Carter. That would never go away. But Michael Carter is going to be the third guy again. Breece Hall is active. He's starting. Play him. It'll be a tough matchup for the pass catchers with the wind conditions, but I can see him Hall actually having a good game on the ground. Don't play Michael Carter, even if he's active. Israel Abanikanda, the fourth guy, is inactive at point. Tennessee Titans. Again, I've talked about this both weeks. Will Levis is behind Malik Davis. Well for Will Levis, to be honest. Um, Colton Dowell at wide receivers out, but that's not really much of a main factor. The big news with the Titans, though, is DeAndre Hopkins is active. So he's in. I guess I only have him in one league. So, glad that I get to keep starting him. It's a tough matchup, though, against the Browns. The one thing, though, with Hopkins is through his career, he's been able to produce even against the toughest of corners. Remember when Jalen Ramsey was with the Jags, he wouldn't necessarily have monster performances, but he also wouldn't get sunk completely in goose egg. Like, he'll put up respectable numbers. I wouldn't necessarily expect them from Hopkins this week. Again, tough matchups for corners. I think he'll at least be worth playing in line. So finally, Washington Commanders. Logan Thomas is out, so the starting tight end would either be John Bates or Cole Turner. I could see Turner being the more athletic option to kind of he's the guy you want to play. But yeah, it's almost 12:15, so I guess I can just gonna check Twitter real quick to see if there are any questions or comments. Nothing in the chat so far, but I do appreciate Joel for asking the question. The DK Metcalf versus Mike Williams. Last week was able to again help him out with Lamar Jackson versus Justin Fields. I hope same type of uh, magic, but the same type of good result happens. Joel, and for all of your teams as well. I hope that showing what I'm doing for my starting lineups, that not only what I'm doing, but why I'm making those decisions, why I'm choosing players over others. All this explanation has helped all of you with your own lineups, your own players, watching and listening. I do appreciate that. And the full press coverage YouTube page, constantly great videos every Sunday morning. I think around 10 or 10:30. Ian and Braden will go live, preview games from a real life NFL perspective. But I'm living in this fantasy world here. I just want to talk about fantasy football. Still like the Packers to win, but that with all these inactives, that's seeming like more of a fantasy. So yeah, yeah, I love talking fantasy football. Love making these start sit decisions. I do find it fun to grind and have to make these tough decisions. So that's why I love doing stuff like setting up the spreadsheet every week, visually seeing the decisions I have to make. I find it helps me, especially in 22 leagues. Not every league has tough decisions. Some of them you just you see the lineup. Everyone's healthy. The best players are in. There are other leagues where you're having to make those decisions. I find write them all down, see them all next to each other, and maybe that can help influence each other as well. Okay, this player I'm having a tough time deciding like 5 or 6 leagues if I wanna play him in. Well, now I get to kinda make that choice and see, which is the most advantageous league to play him in and which one's the most obvious one to bench him in. So again, all that together, I really enjoy this. I hope everyone else enjoys this. For more fantasy football content, you can, follow us on Twitter at FPC_fantasypod. Like Summer says, my co-host Brad Harvin at the Ringdown_BH. We do weekly previews every week. Couldn't do one this week. There's some unforeseen events that just kind of prevented us from recording, but we plan to get back at it for a week before preview and do that every week through the season. I'll be back next week here on Full Press Fantasy Live every Sunday morning at 11:30 on the Full Press Coverage YouTube page. Be sure to subscribe. For anyone watching the video, like it as well. Comment underneath. Anything you want to talk fantasy, I'll try to chime in, check that out. Again, appreciate Joel for joining the live chat. Anyone else who's watching, hoping for great fantasy success for all of you. Today, here we are in week 3. Things are about to kick off on the week. I leave you all saying, enjoy football today. Enjoy fantasy. Enjoy setting those lineups for the next 45 minutes. Appreciate the kind words, Joel, saying great show. So thank you for that. And thank you all for watching another episode of Full Press Fantasy Live. See you all next week.